Hey, Scaredy Cats, welcome back to the Haunted Library. You may know that one of my favorite movies is The Exorcist, which celebrates its 50th anniversary later this year. So I'm very excited to have author Nat Segaloff joining us to talk about his new book, The Exorcist Legacy, 50 Years of Fear. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
The book was fantastic. I enjoyed every minute of it. And I've done a fair amount of research on The Exorcist just for the podcast and through my own just interests. But there were so many things that I learned that, I was surprised by. So always a pleasure.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about how you started writing a book about The Exorcist and all the movies and the show that followed, because it's not just about The Exorcist. You really cover the whole gamut.
Yes, it's about all of the exercise, which I think it's a plural for them. I don't know. You might say I've been possessed by The Exorcist for 50 years because I was a publicist for the Boston theater that was showing The Exorcist back in 1973. And of course, it was to open on the 26th of December. And one of our major critics, a man named Stuart Byron, actually got in touch with William Friedkin by saying, those of us who write for newspapers would have a lot better time reviewing The Exorcist if we had an extra day. Can we have a screening the day before opening, which was a very unusual thing because they were just getting prints from the lab. And Friedkin said yes, and we set up the screening. And my job was to stand outside of the auditorium to block anybody from going in, including people who had tickets for the next show, which I don't know what the movie was. It was over, so that only certain people could get in. Now, I want to raise the question: what day is before December 26th?
Christmas.
Christmas. We had a whole bunch of people who were film critics, probably very happy to get away from their families on Christmas Day, watching The Exorcist, which is about as antithetical to Christmas as you can possibly imagine.
Really?
So I didn't see The Exorcist for a couple of days because the lines were so long and I couldn't get into my own theater. When I finally did see it, of course, I wasn't afraid because I'd read the book. And also, if 500 people around you getting afraid, you're kind of more concerned about them than yourself. But over the years, I've seen the film countless times, and its derivatives, and its sequels, and its prequels. And finally, I decided to write a book about the whole experience.
That's awesome. Now, did you see any of those things that people talk about with people coming out and being sick to their stomachs? Any of that when you were standing outside that door?
I wasn't personally present when anybody did a Technicolor yawn coming out of The Exorcist, but the theater manager and the ushers were friends because, we all worked in the same company. And they told me that many times people didn't make it to the door before they let go.
Oh, no.
Now, from your research, who do you think was more at risk of barfing during The Exorcist?
I feel like it was the men watching it.
Absolutely right. The amazing thing, we didn't do any, studies of it, but Warner Brothers took a survey of the 20-some theaters who were showing. It's mostly men. And do you happen to know what point in the film made them run out?
I do. It's the hospital scene when they're doing, I can't remember what it's called, arteriogram? Was that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we synthesized was that women who are mothers tend to stay and protect the child in jeopardy, whereas the men get the hell out of the way. And in fact, that was borne out when I spoke to Ellen Burstyn for the book, because she said she and Linda Blair became very close to each other during the whole shoot. And in fact, from her character's point of view, it's the story about a mother who will go to any lengths to protect her daughter.
Yeah, it's funny. I that was one of the things that I took away from the book, and it's not something that I'd ever really considered. But now going back and watching the movie, it really is about a mother and the lengths that she will go to save her daughter. And on the other hand, then you have the priest and his battle with faith. But it really is about that kind of maternal love and protection.
The fact that it can be about so many people, and we can talk about the characters in such depth, I think speaks to how good the book and the film are.
Mm-hmm.
These are not just people in a slasher movie. These are people who have lives outside of the page and the screen. And that, I think, is the genius of Bill Blatty's screenplay, which won the Oscar, and Billy Friedkin's making of the movie. These people have lives even when they're not on camera.
Right. Now, you referenced slasher, so I'm going to ask you a question that I know, I believe Friedkin and Blatty both say that this was not a horror movie. Do you consider it a horror movie?
No, I don't.
Nope. Okay.
They call it a film about the mystery of faith, and more precisely, Blatty has called it a story about a supernatural detective story. because, again, the rich character of Lieutenant Kinderman, who is not, I hasten to add, based on Columbo, although he is very, Hamish, um, is investigating a murder, the murder of, and I hope if anybody is watching this now, there are spoilers galore coming up.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the murder of Burke Dennings, the hack director of the film Crash Course, is murdered. And in the course of the film, from Lieutenant Kinderman's point of view, Reagan is the one who did it. And in fact, at the very end of the movie, he arrives at the house not by a coincidence when the exorcism has finally taken place, but he's arrived there to arrest Reagan. And so they all come together for a variety of reasons.
Right.
It's a very, very well structured story.
It is. And I think that's why so many people, like, I do think it's a horror movie, but that's also because I'm a big horror movie fan. But I think that's why so many people who aren't horror movie fans are drawn to it. It's just, it's so much more than, what's the word I'm looking for? So much more. Well, it's so much more than a horror movie.
Yeah, it is. I think there's a reason for that, if I can interrupt you, because,
yeah, of course,
the power of the film comes not so much from the shock. There's only one shock in the whole movie. That's when the torch flares up in the attic when Chris is looking for rats. No, it's because people have been brainwashed by religion for hundreds of years, and they bring that into the theater with them.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and this is how it differs, I think, from a horror movie. When you see a horror movie and it's Dracula or the Frankenstein monster or the werewolf or whatever, and you go to the home, the monsters stay in the theater. But when you get home from The Exorcist, Satan could be in your closet.
That's a very good point. That is a very good point. It's funny that you say that, because this was a movie that I resisted watching for a very long time.
Oh.
I was like, nope, I can't do it. I can't. And I'm not a religious person, but I refused to watch it. It was something that it was my line as a horror fan I wouldn't cross. And I don't know what it was. And even still, I was going to watch it last night. I was home by myself and I thought, no, I can't watch this by myself right now.
Really? Still?
Yeah, still.
But,
and I've seen it so many times.
So you're a horror film maven, and still this last time, it's very strange. The film, because of the way Friedkin directed it with a kind of a documentary style, it looks more real. And I think that affects people too. Everything that happens in the film, with one exception, actually happened, parentheses, in front of the camera. Right. For example, the bed shaking, the levitation, these are not special effects, or rather not special visual effects. The only visual effect in the film is Reagan's vomit.
Really? I didn't know that.
Well, Dick Smith, and who's the brilliant makeup artist, and Marcel Vercouture, who is the mechanical artist, contrived a system whereby they would pump warm pea soup, actually was pea soup, out of the mouth of, both Linda Blair and Eileen Dietz, who is her makeup stand-in in some cases. The tubes, like aquarium tubing, ran underneath the latex applique makeup into the mouth, where they would then turn around and go out. And because of the natural shadows hidden from the camera, you wouldn't see the tubes in the mouth. And they kept on pumping. In fact, if you go to YouTube, I think you can see some of the test footage. They kept on pumping this stuff, and all that happened was it kind of flowed over like somebody had opened up, the bathtub. What they wanted was something that opens if you shake a Pepsi can and it comes right out. Well, they finally gave up on that, and they had to use an optical effect, which is brilliantly done. And in fact, in the newer versions where they've used some CGI to kind of hide the matte lines, you really can't tell it at all. It's a wonderful job for only a few seconds, but it does the job. And of course, it hits Damian Karras, Jason Miller, right on his tunic. And he apparently wasn't expecting it. So they kind of let it fly at poor Jason, and his reaction is real.
Excellent. So you said that you didn't see the movie until it had been open for a couple of days. Do you remember your reaction after you saw it for the first time?
Well, actually, I'm sorry to say this. I don't, because I'd read the book and I knew what was going to happen.
Right.
Although the arteriogram sequence did get to me because it isn't in the book. And I was just marveling at how it worked and how people around me were reacting. But I don't really recall any particular reaction I had. I don't know why.
In the book, you share a lot of great anecdotes about the making of the movie, the relationship between Friedkin and Blatty. Do you have a favorite story that didn't make the book?
No, because Blatty's dead, so I could use some of the stuff he told me off the record at the time. And he was just, well, they're both amazing people, but William Peter Blatty was just a warm, compassionate, funny, dryly funny, wonderful man. And he gave me a lot of things that I couldn't use. You see, I had written biography of William Friedkin back in 1990, and I couldn't use a lot of things then because both gentlemen, thank heaven, were still alive. But with Bill Blatty's passing, I was able to put in some of the things, and they've come out since about the salad dressing fight. Warner Brothers was leaning on Friedkin and Blatty to hurry production because they were just running over budget. A lot of things were happening. Mostly props were breaking, the set burned down, and we'll get into that later. And they got tired of Warner Brothers leaning on them so much. So Blatty and Friedkin decided they would have a fight in front of the company's spy, who they knew was seconded to the set. And they were talking about how many types of salad dressing should be available on the catering bar for the cast and crew. Well, we want to have green goddess. No, we want to have Italian. Well, what about Russian? Well, I think we need Roquefort. And they went on and on until the company spy ran away and said, they're fighting about salad dressing. And that kind of got the company off their backs for a little while.
I love that. They had a really long relationship, correct?
It had begun in the early 60s when Bill Blatty had written a screenplay for a Blake Edwards film called Gun, which was based on the Peter Gunn television series that Edwards had created. Billy Friedkin at that point had just done a film called Good Times for Columbia with Sonny and Cher. And he was looking for another project, and he was invited in to speak to Blake Edwards, and he was handed this script for Gun. What do you think of it? And Billy read the thing, and he said, this is the worst piece of crap I've ever read. He told that to Blake Edwards, who said, well, perhaps you want to say that to the writer. He's waiting right outside. Edwards summoned the writer, and William Peter Blatty was the writer. He came in and said, tell him what you told me. And Billy told Bill the same thing. And from that point on, well, Blatty said, you're right, it is crap. And of course, the film was crap too. Edwards wound up directing it himself. But that cemented a friendship that began in the middle 60s. And so when Bill Blatty had written The Exorcist, he sent a copy of it in the manuscript form to Billy Friedkin, who was then on press tour promoting The French Connection. It was 1971. And Friedkin started reading it and found out he had to cancel his dinner engagement and kept on reading it. And after that, he said, I want to do this movie. And everybody wanted William Friedkin to do it, except Warner Brothers. And that's a whole other story we tell in the book.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you wrote a book about William Friedkin called Hurricane Billy. What is it about him that draws you to him?
He's fearless. And not just that he will do anything to get the shot. He was in his early 30s when I met him in early 1974. There's a story there. And a few years later, we had kept in touch over the years. I said, listen, I'm going to start writing books. May I write your biography? And he said, yes, just like that. He didn't want any approvals. He didn't have any contract. We just shook hands. I mean, this is a man who's still working. And there aren't a whole lot of directors who are still in their careers who allow someone else to write a biography about them. And it wasn't a hagiography. It told a lot of things that he maybe didn't want told. But in the end of it, he told me he respected my choices and respected what I did. And I told him I respected him. So the fact that he would let a novice writer write a book about him when here he was the hottest director in Hollywood, I think shows an awful lot about his character. He's a real gambler. And I think he's a genius. I really do.
Do you have a favorite movie of his?
Sorcerer, without question. And that's not to belittle The Exorcist or The French Connection or To Live and Die in L.A., but I mean, Sorcerer is just his blood on the screen. It is a magnificent film, and nobody recognized it for decades.
Speaking of fearless, when I was looking through your bibliography, you've written a very wide variety of books. Like there's a Sherry Lewis book that you wrote, Billy Friedkin. You are, I believe, your book about Scarface is coming out. It's
coming out in September from Citadel Press, the same people who are doing The Exorcist Legacy.
So how do you decide what you're going to write about? Like what you want to put out into the world, I guess?
That's such a rarefied question. It's like when you ask a filmmaker, what movie do you want to make? And they say, I'll make the movie they'll let me make. I have a wonderful agent whose name is Lee Sobel, and he has a philosophy of what he can sell to publishers. He says, if you shout the title in a shopping mall, people hear it and run to the bookstore to buy it. So we wanted something provocative. And with The Exorcist, of course, it was a slam dunk because I've been living with it for half a century. Scarface was interesting because I happen to love the movie. I had worked with Brian De Palma years ago doing publicity, and it's just one of these misunderstood films. But the next one I'm working on, which I'm not going to announce here, is also a major film series with a troubled past and I think a good future. It's whatever interests me, whatever book I want to read is the one I want to write, but also I want to have a personal contact with it. I've seen the film, I know the filmmakers, and it's just old enough that I can maybe say something new about it that hasn't been said before. Not to say there aren't some really, really great current films, but the state of film scholarship and worse of scholarship and archiving is such that I don't think we're going to see a lot more books about movies. I really don't. I think everything's going to go on Facebook, oral histories, which are easy to do, and those will be dismissed by the current group of film consumers. I think the movie books are going to have a hard time.
Well, that's a shame. I love reading movie books.
I love writing them because they pay money.
There you go.
I've got to find something else to do for my life. You know?
So what you talked about working on publicity for the Boston Theater that showed the movie when it came out. What did that entail? Like besides standing outside that door, not letting anybody in?
Well, the mundane part is writing press releases and getting them to the newspapers, because in those days we had newspapers and we had press releases. We didn't have social media, so we didn't communicate by rumor as they do these days. We actually took out ads and did publicity. When stars or directors or writers would come to town, I would take them around to the TV stations and radio stations and newspapers and set up interviews, and that's how we generated publicity. We'd also occasionally do publicity stunts if the film company was willing to do it. You didn't want to do a publicity stunt like you wouldn't have, buy your cans of pea soup here for The Exorcist. That would have been a bad taste. But the joy of that was getting to meet so many filmmakers, and many of them I've stayed in touch with over the years. When I became a critic, I interviewed some of them, and so we had a backstory, and I didn't have to break through and learn the code. We had just talked, and it was wonderful to do all this. And I published a couple of memoirs about it called Screensaver. But the weird thing about doing publicity for The Exorcist, and you may be edging toward this, is my bosses and I were indicted by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for, let me get the billing right, blasphemy, obscenity, and corrupting the morals of a minor. There was this crazy religious nut named Rita Warren, who lived in Brockton, Massachusetts, who had brought her daughter, who was underage, to see an R-rated film, and thereafter claimed that the child had been harmed by what she had seen on screen. Now, why Rita Warren was not arrested for child endangerment under those circumstances, I'll never know. But the case was thrown out of court, as it turned out, on the first day of Lent. And Rita Warren went on to be a pain in the ass in Washington, D.C., where she would stand on the steps of the Capitol, crusading for Christ, and even having a standee of Christ you could have your picture taken with. She passed a couple of years ago, and I'm sure she's lying down on Satan's griddle right now. No, I don't carry vengeance or anything.
Wow. So it was your fault and the studio's fault and the theater's fault that she brought her child to an R-rated movie.
Yes, I don't know the child. I suspect she's all right because no harm was done. A lot of people have seen the movie since then, and it was R-rated. I mean, with parental guidance and in the company of a parent or adult guardian. So, that was the rules.
Yeah, my goodness.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've been asked this question many times. There's a lot of talk about The Exorcist being cursed.
I win a bet. Yeah. My dog and I thought that'd be one of the first two questions. So at least you held off. Thank you. You have, yeah, I know. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, there was no curse on The Exorcist. Okay, so the set burned down. Okay, so people died. All right, so a crew member lost a toe. But there's no curse on The Exorcist. No. Well, it went over budget. There's no curse on The Exorcist. Look, statistically speaking, if you take the 500 people who worked on the film and their families, and you follow them over 3 years, somebody is going to get a hangnail. And that certainly is the case. It happens in any film, but it's with The Exorcist that people tend to attach significance to it because of the nature of the film itself. Right. Now, Ellen Burstyn, who is a very spiritual woman, and who I think, by the way, is the finest actress of her generation, um, believes that there was a bad vibes about it. And she talks about some spiritual message tapes that she had stolen from a tape recorder, and there was something going on there. And if she believes it, it's got to be true for her. I don't want to dispute anything she says, but we take away from The Exorcist what we bring to it.
Right. Yeah, I think in the book and I don't have the exact quote handy. I should have pulled that, but I think she says something about actually I probably do. I think I bookmarked it on my Kindle.
Oh, I have no index on this. This is the advanced reading copy, so I have no idea where it is. Go ahead.
Let me just give me 2 seconds and I will find it.
In the meantime, I'll take this opportunity to speak to the viewer. And the other book that I have out this year is More Fire, about the Towering Inferno, because I was a publicist on that film and saved all my notes. And thank you for mentioning it before. This is Sherry Lewis and Lamb Chop. Okay, we now return to our program, which is already in progress.
Perfect.
I'm a whore.
She said, I don't think you fool around with those kind of energy fields without having some sort of manifestation. And we had a lot.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure that's the case. She made a remarkable film in a few years later called Resurrection. Absolutely. Daniel Petrie directed, and Louis John Carlino wrote the screenplay, about a woman who has a traffic accident and emerges from it as a healer, not a faith healer, but a healer. And these forces of healers, and they're very spiritual, and she will tear your heart out if you watch that film, Resurrection. I think that speaks very much to her personality and to the confluence of events that happen when things we can't explain do happen.
Right. So 50 years later, why do you think The Exorcist still resonates so much with viewers?
It's a brand name by now. And because folks like you, even though you've seen it, are reluctant to see it again, there's something forbidden about it. When I was younger, it was Night of the Living Dead that we were all afraid to see.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they were showing it at midnight, and it was the first film, where you'd see people eating what looked like human flesh. But it was black and white until the colorized version, and not very well shot, but it had a wonderful sense about it. And The Exorcist kind of inherited that mantle. It's about things that you don't talk about, and it was a revelatory movie, and the verisimilitude with which it was done, I think, increased its veracity. Have I used enough big words yet? But it survived because it works.
It does. It definitely does. And anything, do you have a favorite of the sequels, the TV show, anything that you think kind of, I know that there's a lot of hate directed towards some of the sequels.
The prequels and sequels have enough baggage to fill a cargo hold. I rather like Exorcist 3, which Bill Blatty wrote and directed himself, but there are two versions of it. There's the version that was released, which is Exorcist 3, and there's one called Legion, which is the name of the book that it was based on, that was pieced together by him and Mark Kermode and a few others, trying to reconstruct his version before the film company decided to reshoot and do a lot of editing on it. It's a very interesting story. Morgan Creek Productions, who acquired the rights of The Exorcist with the making of Exorcist 3, has also done the prequels. They're involved in the television series, and they're involved in the new trio that are coming out starting on October 13th. And Morgan Creek, who wouldn't talk to me, are brave. They're an independent film company, and they threw so much money after the versions of the films they thought didn't work to remake them that you have to hand it to them. I mean, they really stepped up to the plate, not once, but twice with every movie, and really tried to do something. So if you take the two sequels, which began as Dominion, which was Paul Schrader's version. Now, Paul Schrader, I think, is a nonpareil filmmaker anyway. He can do anything he wants. And he made a very thoughtful film about a prequel to The Exorcist involving Father Merrin. The company didn't like it, so they took it away from him before he'd finished it, and they gave it to Rennie Harlin. Rennie Harlin is an action director, and he reshot, he says, 90% of the film. Well, what you've got is two different movies about the same thing. What brought Father Merrin to the McNeil house years later? These are about his experiences in Africa. Paul Schrader made a film, and Rennie Harlin made a movie. That's the distinction artistically, commercially, and I think intellectually. They both have some good points to them, but I think on the whole, they're unrealized. Certainly Paul Schrader's. I'm not as much against it as some people are. I think it has a terrific number of thoughts, and Schrader is a brilliant man. The Harlan film is more of a roller coaster ride, a very different style throughout. But the elephant in the room is Exorcist II: The Heretic, which is John Borman's film. Now, I'm not a huge Borman fan. He tried something. He said, if there is great evil in the world, there also has to be great good. In a way, this is sort of what Blatty was talking about by saying, if there's a devil, there must be a God.
Right.
But unfortunately, Borman didn't have the intellect or the skills to bring about his thesis. And so he made a movie about grasshoppers. It's stylish. It doesn't make a lot of sense, even when he recut it. And it's a shame. And this is something Mark Kermode pointed out. He reminded me that when John Borman was offered The Exorcist back in 1972, before Friedkin was involved, by Warner Brothers, because he'd made Deliverance for them, it was very hot with Warner Brothers. He said, this film should not be made. It's about the torturing of a girl. And then they had him do the sequel. Now, how can you have a man make a sequel to a movie that he said should not have been made? I think that was the big problem with Heretic.
Right. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about The Exorcist. The book comes out on July 25th.
Yes, and I'm going to hold it up again. It's called,
yes.
This is the advanced reading copy. It really doesn't, the spiffy final one. I'm holding this up now because sometimes people forget. It's called The Exorcist Legacy, and it's available all over on everything and everybody.
Perfect. Thank you. And where can people find you? Like, do you have social media or anything that you want to?
I have a website, which is www.natsegaloff.com. I'm on Facebook, I suppose, but I never really has occurred to me. There's so many people who come out of the woodwork for something like The Exorcist, and I'm kind of careful about what I do. I'm not into pentagrams, and I don't, consort with demons under the light of a full moon.
Right. So you don't have like a black room in your basement. Wasn't that a rumor about?
I so don't want to go there. No, I have a dog. That's it.
There you go. Perfect. Well, you can catch us on Twitter at Cat Scaredy and on Instagram at Scaredy Cats the podcast. Subscribe wherever you find podcasts, and don't forget to let us know what you think by leaving us a review. Make sure you check out The Exorcist Legacy: 50 Years of Fear. And until next time, stay scared. And I know why I couldn't find the record button before. It was because I